Hey, welcome back to Pagitt Radio, and a conversation with Roger Olson. Roger is a professor at Truett Theological Seminary in Waco, Texas, part of Baylor University, and is engaging in a conversation both through his blog, which is over at Patheos. You can type in Roger Olson into Google, and you'll come up with his website there right away. He's also running this through in a book called Against Calvinism, and the suggestion is that evangelicalism, this broad tradition of Christianity in North America, has been influenced in its whole tradition, its whole history, by Calvinism and other views. But in the last few years, it seems to me, and to Roger perhaps, that the Calvinist cabal has pulled together and has said, we are going to right this ship, we are going to purify the theology, we're going to make it the way it ought to be. And they have every right to do so. It's just some of us don't want to give that up. I don't believe that's the only way it should go. So, Roger, what is your suggestion about what a evangelicalism should be in North America, and why do you think that's important that it hear your voice?
Well, first of all, before I answer that, let me mention there's another book coming out, I believe in October, that I have a chapter in from the same publisher called 4 Views on Evangelicalism.
Oh, really?
And it's authored by 4 of us. One of them is there in Minneapolis named Botter, and he teaches at a Baptist seminary there. Al Mohler is president of Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. John Stackhouse teaches at Regent College in Canada. And then I have the 4th chapter on what I call post-conservative evangelicalism.
Uh-huh.
So among the 4 of us, I'm sort of labeled the envelope pusher, kind of the radical lefty or something, which I don't agree with. I don't think that's what I am at all.
Yes.
But I have the vision of evangelicalism as a big tent. That's my metaphor for evangelicalism. I grew up in a very revivalistic wing of evangelicalism, and we had tent meetings in the summer, and people would come and sit around the outside of the tent as well as under the tent, and, you know, it's kind of hard to tell sometimes exactly who was at the revival and who was just there to visit and look on. And I see evangelicalism as made up of many different theologies. I mean, it's not like anything goes. It's not a circus, but I see it as diverse. And we gather around a center rather than within boundaries, is the way I like to put it. It's a centered set. And the gospel is the center, but we disagree among ourselves on some of the details about the meaning of the gospel. And we always have. That's the thing. It's not anything new. We always have.
And if I hear you right in your writing and what you're even saying now, you have suggested that's where the strength lies, that the strength of evangelicalism is that it is a center set rather than a bounded set system. And if we lose that, we're actually going to lose the benefits and the strength of evangelicalism. So even though people like you might be accused, and I know I certainly am, accused of wanting to see the end of evangelicalism or not being not being vigilant in its profession, we actually would tend to see ourselves as saying, no, this is how you keep it strong, that varied opinion is a necessary component. Is that right?
It's also the historical reality of evangelicalism. So while I'm arguing for a dynamism of evangelicalism, that is, that's open to change because it's pluralistic within, that's also its history. So I'm arguing for it staying the same.
Oh, that's interesting.
I see evangelicalism as always having been a mosaic of people with different viewpoints who agree on certain things, but not everything.
So tell me, when the others that you write with in this book, or the conversation you're having with others that I know you have a high regard of respect for and find as your peers and honor their positions, how would they see your position? How do they say, no, here's what Roger really does? I know Roger says this is the history, this has been our long history, this is a dynamism, but really what he's saying amounts to what? Like, what's their critique of yours? Oh, anarchy.
Oh, yeah. In fact, in this 4 Views book that's coming out, 2 of the authors there, we respond to each other's chapters, see. So they accuse me after reading my chapter in their responses, 2 of them do, of really abandoning evangelicalism entirely, because their view of evangelical history is that it's always been monolithic and that it still is really and should be, but there are these sort of false evangelicals hanging around who aren't really worthy of the name. And they see me that way, but a lot of other people, not just me, a lot of people who've been evangelical for decades think that way.
Well, and
I call it neo-fundamentalism, because I think they're trying to narrow it down to one strand and sort of control it.
Yeah, and I find that interesting because one of the histories which you have certainly told of evangelicalism goes back to the Great Awakening movement in the 1700s, but then there's also the kind of resurging evangelicalism of the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, where where American theologians were faced with a view coming out of the turn of the 20th century of a liberalism, of liberal theology on one hand, and a fundamentalism on the other, definable with four fundamentals. And there was a movement of people to say there's something that's not just liberal theology or fundamentalist theology. It's this other option called, at the time, referred to as neo-evangelicalism, or evangelicalism in the early 20th and mid-20th century.
Yeah.
And that's what most people, I think, experience on kind of a practical level, like churches that came out of that period of time, camps that were started, nonprofit organizations like Campus Crusade for Christ, and a number of parachurch organizations.
Well, for me, it was Youth for Christ.
Youth for Christ.
I grew up going to Youth for Christ meetings, and that's where I learned as a teenager that evangelicalism included variety.
Right.
Because in the church I grew up in, which was fairly fundamentalist, we didn't really think there were any other Christians, hardly but us. At least all the others were bad Christians. But in Youth for Christ, I discovered there were people of Reformed faith, Lutheran faith, even some Catholics, certainly Baptist, Pentecostal, Evangelical Free, Covenant, and it just opened my eyes to a whole world of evangelicalism that shook my worldview, let's say, not my faith, but my worldview, and I had to take all this into account and realize that it's all evangelical equally.
Yeah, and isn't one of the kind of characteristics of fundamentalism to say we are the ones who have it right, and those other people don't? Right. So if
they
that's
started out with 4 fundamentals, but it soon became 10, 12, and 20.
10. Yeah, right. So they have these. So isn't it fair to argue? And I maybe we should have all 4 authors on when the 4 Views book comes out. But wouldn't it be fair to argue that these neo-Calvinists are actually functioning more like early 20th century fundamentalists, and they have now taken up the right side of the debate? And they're really playing the role of the fundamentalist, and we still need an evangelicalism to be an option that's not fundamentalism or liberalism. Because it seems to me, and if you're okay, can you stick around for another 8-minute segment?
Sure.
Okay, I would love to do that, because I'd love to get your response to that. If it's possible that really what's happened in our world is we've ended up now with a new kind of fundamentalism, liberal situation, which needs a new evangelicalism in its 21st century response the way that there was in the 20th century. And I don't want to call these folks names that they're just fundamentalists, but it seems like that's how they're functioning, and I'd love to get your correction.
I call them neo-fundamentalists because there are still people who are true to the old fundamentalist tradition. These new fundamentalists are a little different. They're not necessarily separatistic. They don't call Billy Graham bad names.
No, they call Roger Olson bad names, and they call Rob Bell bad names. They call a different set of people bad names. Anyway, okay, so we got commercial breaks because we got to pay for this all around here. So it's coming up in 20 seconds, Roger. If you'd stick with us, I would sure appreciate that. Okay, Doug Pagitt Radio. You can find the audio podcast of this too. If this is an interesting conversation to you now and you want to listen to it later, or share it with a friend over at DougPagittRadio.com and at AM 950 on Facebook. And we'll be back here after the break.
Hey guys, what are you doing Saturday morning at